Hey there, gang. Welcome back. It's Hensel time again. I know, but apparently it's my lot in life, and now I'm the foremost expert in repairing these things because I put up a couple of videos. I've worked on 8 or 9 at this point. Anyway, the short story for those of you who are new. Arthur Hensel, the maker, immigrated from Germany to Canada in the early 30s. He's probably trained in violin making. His father might have been a foreman in one of the German violin factories. It's the Depression, so he starts building guitars instead for R.S. Williams & Sons. It's a venerable Canadian maker and distributor of music stuff. They had a couple of retail outlets and a big catalog enterprise. These were, shipped all across the country. You can find them coast to coast. They're akin to something like the Montgomery Ward or Sears catalog guitars in the U.S. So like Kalamazoo's, K's, Carson Robeson's, Stella's, that kind of thing. Maybe a little lower on the scale. So he does that until the 40s. The company closes. He works under his own name for a while after that. End of story. Not much more to say about it. Are they good guitars? They're made with good materials. The same as you would find in a pre-war Gibson LOO. And those guitars are valued 20 times higher than these. Should these be worth more? I don't know. They have a design issue. Well, okay, the fret spacing is usually a little bit loose, which isn't uncommon, but the string length is almost always wrong too. This one plays 11 cents flat at the 12th fret because the bridge was glued on in the wrong place, and that seems to be the same for most of them. It's fine for some kinds of music, like a lot of chordal stuff, but it's not great for others where pitch precision is really important. So if you have perfect pitch, this thing's going to drive you nuts. The selling price on these isn't that high. And to be honest, to make them play great usually costs just about as much as they'd sell for. So it's always a balancing act. They aren't Martins. They're not likely to increase in value to the scale of a Martin, but some of them sound really good for what they are. In terms of sound, this is probably the nicest Hensel I've worked on. It's owned currently by Jitterbug James, a guitar and vocalist of the Vaudevillian. I'll leave a link in the description so you can check them out. It's pretty fun stuff. They do like ragtime, dirty blues, 20s and 30s hokum music, like Blind Willie McTell, that kind of thing. And he actually plays this, so we're talking working musician's tool here. It's not a collector's item to him. I looked at this a couple of years ago, and there were some buzzes from low nut slots, and the action was high. The bridge was cut down at some point in the past. There was a new saddle put in here. The action is still high, of course, and there's not much room to lower the saddle. We're at the point where the sound would die, really, if we tried to do that. You need a certain amount of string height here above the soundboard to get the top in motion. So it really is neck reset time. Do we do the real deal on this one? I've had the fingerboard off on one of these, and I did a neck reset on another, and in both cases the dovetail was quite irregular, not particularly well fit, and is very short. It's only about a quarter of an inch long. I get worried that if I start trying to heat up right around the body joint here, we might end up loosening the sides from the neck block, which is kind of messy. It's time consuming, and cost is a factor here too. These are actual itinerant musicians living that lifestyle. Naturally, they've been locked down in quarantine for a couple of months, so like everyone else, the money isn't exactly flowing in. And I'm pretty sure that this is Canadian stimulus dollars coming at me here, so we need to keep this affordable. Oh, that's one thing I want to say, especially to all you American types. You need to stop asking me about fixing your guitar if you live in Arkansas or Idaho or New Mexico. I'm getting so many requests that I have to make a form reply for the emails. Don't ship your guitar internationally for repairs. That does not make sense economically. And if you do it now, odds are it's going to sit baking in the back of some van in the sun somewhere for 2 weeks, probably falling apart. So I urge you, find someone in your state to do your repair work. Support your local economy. That is more important now than ever before. If you don't help out your local scene, it's going to die. Okay? Right. So I'm going to do the Kung Fu neck reset on this again. I can't remember where I picked that term up from. Facebook or Instagram? I don't know. I know I definitely saw Frank Ford discuss the actual procedure involved a long time ago in a Guild of American Luthiers journal. So basically what it entails is turning this into a bolt-on style neck. And oh, what about the tone? Will it change the tone? And yes, it will. It'll probably make it sound better. Because you know what? We're going to have more downward pressure on the saddle, more motion in the top. It'll probably be louder, maybe sounding fuller. You know, guitars with great tone that you can't play because the action's too hard just generally remain silent, right? So there could be some slight alteration in the tonal character. That's a consequence of major surgery. But on the other hand, there could be some benefits to this too. So you have to be brave and, you know, think about the possibilities that open up when you have a guitar that's easier to play. As usual, there are some measurements we should take before we get the strings off here. I'm interested in seeing how high the strings are off the top of the soundboard. In this case, we're at about 5/16 of an inch, which is just around 8 millimeters, which is quite low. This bridge has been cut down to the lowest a bridge should be cut down, which is about 1/4 of an inch. Anything lower than that, and it not only looks ridiculous, but it doesn't function very well. I was asked recently about, you know, what the magic number is, you know, having the strings, you know, the height of the strings above the soundboard, and 1/2 inch was mentioned. And that is, you know, pretty typical. If you find a modern guitar with a domed top, ordinarily the bridge will be somewhere around 3/8 of an inch tall, you know, 9 millimeters-ish, and then the strings themselves will be about 12 millimeters, just under 1/2 inch. On these older guitars, though, it can be kind of a gamble, making a new bridge or having a saddle height be that tall. Now, obviously, I want to increase the saddle height here because there's nothing there, and, you know, why do a neck reset and end up with something that looks like this? I happen to have an original Hensel bridge here that was not cut down before removal, and the original bridge here is around 11/32 of an inch, which is about 8.5 millimeters in height. So somewhere along the line, 2.5 millimeters was shaved off the top of this bridge. We could make a new bridge that looks more like this, but I worry about the excuse me, the amount of string tension on this top. I've seen inside these, the bracing is quite light. It's very diminutive. It's something you would find on a guitar that was designed around the era when steel strings were first being put on guitars. You know, prior to this, it was gut mostly. So, you know, I don't really want to have 1/2 inch string height on this guitar. I think probably somewhere around 3/8 of an inch would be more reasonable. That would give us a nice tall saddle. Over the years we could take it down again if need be, but we're not in danger of collapsing the top. The other thing is if we were to put in a saddle that would give us the 1/2 inch, in this case, it would be so tall that we'd risk, you know, breaking out the rosewood in this bridge. The other thing I was noticing when I was doing the intonation is that on the bass side here, our low E is pretty good. It's almost right on the money. This saddle slot was originally much longer. It was a through saddle. This was plugged and recut at some point. But of course on the treble side we're still very flat. You know, if you go up to the 12th fret, it's noticeably sour if you're doing a turnaround or something. So just looking at it though, it's kind of unequal on both sides. We've got much less exposed past the string on the bass side. So what would happen if we took that measurement, it's around 5 millimeters, and did the same on this side, replugged and recut the slot, making it shorter again? That would give us a little bit extra real estate here in front that we could angle the saddle more acutely and use up some of that extra string length, get us closer in tune. I think that's a good idea. I have to make a new saddle anyway, and plugging and recutting is not a huge job for me. So I think we should try that out, see what we can do. I've got a straight edge running along the top surface of the frets, and that lets me see where it ends up relative to the front edge of the bridge here. We are about 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch off the top surface at this point. Ordinarily in a neck reset we would want to tilt the neck back so that when we're done this would be at about the top surface of the bridge, or maybe riding slightly high, maybe about a 32nd of an inch above, depending on what the top does when string tension hits it. So I'm going to take this measurement again without the strings on because those can be different, and I want to make sure that I know, you know, generally speaking, predict how much I need to take off. This is part of a calculation to figure out theoretically how much we would have to reduce the saddle height in order to get us the action that we want. In this case, we've got an action of about 7.5 64ths, 110 thousandths, which is about 2.8 millimeters. And we want to reduce that, so I also have to add something, because if we did the standard neck reset formula, do the neck reset, we would end up with a saddle that's exactly the same height as it is now. And that's unacceptable. We want more saddle height. We want enough brake angle and also, the ability to adjust it later on down the road. In this case, we'll probably want to add a couple of millimeters, 80 thousandths to whatever the measurement is. I also need to measure the distance between, in this case, the 12th fret, or whatever fret is at the body, to the front of the saddle as well, because we're going to do a little basic trigonometry. And I need to measure the length of the heel to the underside of the fingerboard, not the top surface, just to where it contacts with the soundboard. This should be familiar if you've watched any of my other videos concerning neck resetting. It's just a formula to figure out how much I need to remove from the far end of the heel to take the neck back and put it into proper relationship with the body. Okay, we've got feeler gauges here adding up to 42 thousandths of an inch. And I'm pressing them against the binding in the area of the heel. And I'm going to score a line there. This will give us some indication of where we should be ending up. As in so many of these guitars, it seems like there's something funny going on with the heel here. Maybe there was a strap button that someone didn't want anymore, they covered it over. Maybe there's a big screw that runs into the heel. I'm going to have to excavate and figure out what it is, because I don't want to run my saw into a chunk of metal if I can afford it. The other thing is there's a bunch of little funny divots and stuff going on up here. Now that could be from someone wearing a ring and sliding up to the 12th fret, but it's a funny place for that kind of wear. I don't know what's going on up here. Seems to be filled with like drywall compound or plaster of Paris or something. Oh, I just improved the tone. One Robertson red screw. I don't know why that would have been in there, other than maybe the heel was loose at some point. It's good and solid now, and it looks to me like there's some glue residue right here in the corners, so someone probably shoved some in from the side. I don't think the neck has ever been off before. It's my Japanese saw. It's shorter these days. It developed a stress fracture halfway along the blade, and so I cut it down. This part was still nice and sharp, so. I'll cut in from both sides, and then, cut from the bottom up to the top. The scoring marks that I'm creating here on the sides will basically guide the saw all the way down, and I won't have to worry too much about it. I'm sorry if the shot looks shaky. I've got the head of the guitar held carefully in my vise, well padded. It's just going to jiggle around a little bit, but it's controllable. I finished sawing through from the back here, then heated up the fingerboard extension and loosened that up to the 12th fret. You'll see that when this came free, there was a little piece of the dovetail that remained stuck there. I don't know whether this was broken previously or whether it came off during this removal. Hensel did a lot of the undercutting for me here when he fit the dovetail. There's a lot of glue that was packed into the slot. I'm drilling a hole through the neck block, which will eventually accommodate the screw which will hold the heel in place. I'm pulling sandpaper between the joint of the heel and the body here, shifting the angle of the neck backwards in relation to the body to perfect the angle and also mate the two surfaces together. I'm cleaning up the screw hole here to accept a tapered mahogany plug, which I eventually stained and finished to look like the rest of the neck. Here I'm using a colored pencil through the screw hole to give me a mark so I know where to drill for the threaded insert for the neck bolt. What I neglected to film was I actually flooded the entire area with super glue around the insert and also glued it into place so that it's in there very securely. While the neck was off the body, we decided to add some side dot markers. Drilling, gluing in the little plastic insert with some super glue, lopping it off, letting it dry, cutting it off with a chisel, and then polishing with fine sandpaper. So I've recorded measurements for the current saddle placement, how far away from the front edge of the bridge it is and where it's located, so we can get rid of this. As you can see, it's very small and it literally just fell apart. So not much left of that saddle. Also, well, that's not good. The saddle slot is quite irregular, and the person who originally cut it deeper, I think they must have tried to do that freehand with a Dremel tool or something. So I'm going to have to reroute this out, and so I have a good channel to fit something into. I used a 3/16 inch spiral cut bit to enlarge the slot and make it uniform. Then I created a rosewood plug that fit in there nice and snugly and glued that into place. Then I trimmed that off with block plane and carefully sanded it so it was smooth. Then I went back, figured out where the saddle should be, and rerouted for the new saddle slot. Because the neck angle is changed, I need to make a wedge that will go underneath the fingerboard extension and keep it in line with the rest of the fingerboard. So I'm scraping and sanding, glued that on, and then trimmed off the excess. And then I bolted the neck in place and glued the fingerboard extension down. Okay, let's review stringing a slotted headstock, because I see a lot of weird stuff going on. So if I'm going to string this upper E here, what I'll do is I'll pull the string along, extend it slightly past the next roller up. So past the B string roller. Maybe 1/4 of an inch or so, 6 millimeters. And then I'll cut it off there. Discard the other string. I'm going to grab a pair of pliers, and I'm going to put a nice hard right angle bend in that string. The bend is maybe 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch. Then I can thread that in the tuner post. On this outside string, the first wrap is going to go around the post away from center, so towards the outside cheek of this headstock. Having done one revolution, I can put the next one on the inside. And what that does is it pulls for these outside strings, they're taking off closer to the center. It means that they're not going to get fouled up against the inside of this slot here. Now in this case, it's probably going to touch the end of the slot here. It wasn't cut as deep as I would normally cut mine. It can't be helped. It's just the design. The next one here, I'm going to do something similar. I'll go to the next post about 1/4 of an inch, 6 millimeters past that. Same routine. Cut that off. Grab pliers. Same right angle. And the right angle is helpful. It really does hold things on the tuner post much easier. Exactly the same procedure, except on this one I'm going to go around the post on the inside towards the center line for that first turn. And then subsequent turns, once I get past the point where the string is poking out of the post there, we'll go on the outside towards this cheek of the headstock. And what that does is it provides clearance for all three strings. None of them end up rubbing against the side of the slot, which on this guitar, I mean, it's had almost a century of that kind of thing, but in a nice new guitar you wouldn't want to be putting a whole bunch of scratches or nicks in the finish. But what you can see is that there's plenty of clearance. It crosses over top of that first string, and the next one will be exactly the same. It too gets wrapped around First wrap on the inside, second wrap on the outside. That gives us good clearance. It's nice and neat. There's not a whole lot of extra stuff hanging around on there, and they come off easily. You're not spending all day trying to take off the strings. And yes, normally I'd be using a string winder. I'm doing the old trick here with the B strings. This is like a 15 or a 16, which I've bent into a right angle, and I can use that to find the intonation point. The top of the saddle is still flat right now. It's at about the right height, but this gives me just enough of a bump up that I can check the intonation and find the sweet spot. And I'm very happy, actually. Things are still looking good in the bass. The treble side is far, far closer to proper intonation. Moving the saddle forward at this point helped a lot. Well, alright. I think he's going to be happy with that. Plays much easier now. There's good saddle height. The wedge and the heel look nice. It's closed up good and tight. Of course, we have side dot markers now.